Hey guys, another video for our How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist. We actually have talked about this topic once before on the How To playlist, but we thought we'd make a little bit more comprehensive video on the topic because there are a number of people who watch our videos who we know have connections to Japan, where they might be coming to live here in the future, and we also know there are some people who watch our videos who've only been here a short time, so I think perhaps a little bit more comprehensive video might help. And it's the rather uncomfortable, difficult topic of funerals and the associated memorials and things that go with it. So actually we're driving right past a funeral home as we speak. There are a lot of them around. So to start at the beginning, usually what happens is when someone passes away, they usually have a period of a couple of days where people can come and say goodbye. So sometimes they'll actually do that in the home, in the family home. They'll actually do an open casket type thing in the family home. So one of the rooms will be just set up with the casket in there, open casket in there, and everybody will just sit around it. Or they'll do it in one of the funeral homes like we just drove past. And it's usually a Buddhist type ceremony or series of ceremonies, and Japanese people actually sort of joke about that a little bit because they say that they're born Shinto and die Buddhist, because a lot of the ceremonies around being born and being a baby and being a young child are Shinto related, and most Japanese people, when it comes time for their funeral, have Buddhist funerals. So it's only sort of a joke. There's variations on it, and Japanese people most of them are sort of a mix of Shinto and Buddhist anyway, but it is a bit of a Japanese thing. They'll say to you, yes, we're born Shinto and we die Buddhist. That's just what they say. So more often than not, it's a Buddhist style experience, a Buddhist style series of ceremonies. So the first couple of days, maybe 2 or 3 days, the open casket thing will be happening, and it's interesting. They have a connection with the star or the lucky days or the calendar. So there are days that are considered good days to have a funeral and days that are considered not good days. So they usually consult that, and then that dictates when the funeral will be. So sometimes it's within a day or so of the person passing away, or it might be a couple of days more, depending on the calendar. And they'll decide from the calendar, okay, no, this is an unlucky day to have a funeral, and this is a good day to have a funeral, and they'll decide what day to have the funeral. So the first couple of days, usually people are sitting around. Now, I'll give the perspective of the family, because last time we gave the perspective of an outsider. We'll give the perspective of the family this time, because if you happen to be related to the person who's passed away, your involvement is going to be a lot bigger. What tends to happen is that the family will sit around and if we use the example of the funeral home, they'll have the casket out the front with big Buddhist altar with flowers and fruit and all sorts of things, and then pictures of the person who's passed away, and then the open casket. And usually the family sits in rows of seats, just sort of like a Christian-style church type setup with rows of seats, sometimes facing each other, and then they have usually an incense, a little table with incense on it, and it's incense powder usually. There's a couple of variations on this, but usually they have like a hot stone there, and you take out the incense powder. So when someone comes in, person comes in for the first time, they'll go over to this table and they'll and this is everybody, when you first go in this room for the first time, you go over and pick up little bits of powder and put it on the stone, do that 2 times, and sort of bow to the person who's passed away, and usually bow to the family as well. With that situation, it does vary a bit. Unfortunately, we've actually been to a lot of funerals, and they do vary a bit. The way the incense is done, how the layout of where everybody's sitting and that sort of thing. They're mostly the same. They're mostly the same, but there are small variations. The best thing with this thing to do is just to copy what the people before you do. And usually the staff at those funeral homes will tell you, now come in here, now do this, now do this. But the best thing, as we've said before in Japan, the best thing's always just to copy the people that go before you and copy what they do, because everybody does the same thing. Kids, adults, everybody. So I'll just back up a little bit too. To go to these funerals, everybody wears the same clothes. If you go to a Japanese department store, you'll actually find one rack usually of ladies' black suits. They have these sort of, it's a dress, it's a skirt, black, what do you call that? It's like a skirt suit. So black long black skirt and matching jacket, and they're specifically for funerals. And you can tell, if you see, there's another funeral home next to us right here, and if you saw people walking past here, you'd know they're going to a funeral, because the ladies all wear exactly the same. It's this a white shirt covered with the black jacket and the black skirt and the black shoes, and everything's black. Any sort of hair accessory, anything like that is all black. And the men all wear a black suit and a white shirt and a black tie. Everybody, without exception. And then everybody has juzu, which are the Buddhist beads. This bead, what do you call that thing? A ring of beads, and everybody holds a set of juzu in their hands and walks in and does this same ceremony. So actually, got to back up a little bit further too. When you first walk in, so you'll walk in, you'll be wearing your black suit, and you've got to do it, guys. You won't see anybody there who's wearing anything different. So if you get invited to if you're told that there's a funeral happening and that you've got to come to this funeral, or you should come to this funeral, this is what you've got to do it, because you don't see any exceptions to this. So you've got to get yourself into a black suit with a black tie, and no exceptions, and get some juzu. You can buy those all over the place. They actually sell them in convenience stores. You can buy them just about anywhere. Little ring of juzu. And then when you first walk into the funeral parlour, they'll have tables just inside the door, a long table, and there'll usually be two or three guys there. Often they're relatives of the person who's passed away, usually young men, and there'll be 2 or 3 young men there, and they have a big ledger, big book, and a card. Usually they'll give you a card, like a reservation, like a check-in card at a hotel, that you write your name and your address and your phone number and this sort of thing, and you write all this stuff down, and then you give these guys an envelope, and it's a special envelope, and it's on the other video. We'll put a link to the other video underneath this video. It's a special envelope that you can buy, and again, you can buy them from convenience stores or supermarkets, and they're a special black envelope. You'll see in the video below, special black envelope, and you put the money in there in a special way, and you have to put money, it has to be an odd number, and if it's a really distant person that you don't, it's your friend's grandmother, or it's some distant person like that, you could probably put 3,000 or 5,000 yen in there, would probably be okay. But if it's, the closer the person is to you, the more money you have to put in there. And we recently lost a grandmother in the family, lost a grandmother, and so as her grandchildren, or in my case the husband of the grandchildren, we put in 50,000 yen, so it's about $500 or $600, and everybody does it. And the closer you are to the person, the more money you'll be putting in. If it's your own parents, or if it's somebody closer to you like that, you'll be putting in a lot more, of course. So everybody puts money into these envelopes and hands them to these young guys, and these guys all write it down, and they actually write down how much you give them as well, into a ledger thing. And then you go into that room, and then you do the incense thing. And again, usually when you walk in the room, the family of the deceased person will be sitting in a rows of seats. Sometimes they're facing the front, sometimes they're facing inwards. There'll be a couple of rows on either side of the room, they'll be facing inwards. And you walk in, and usually you bow to that family as sort of a respect for them. And they might not, when you do that, they might not acknowledge you at all. They might just sort of be sitting there and not acknowledge you at all, or they might bow back to you. And then you go to the incense thing, and usually it's 2 times. You pick up the powder, and and put it on the little hot stone thing, and it just burns away. And you do that 2 times, and then little sort of hand thing, and then bow to the people again. We've made videos like this in the past, and people have said, "Oh, I'm not going to do that. That's not my religion. You know, I'm not going to do that because that's not my religion." If you feel really super strongly about it, then you're best off not going, because if you go there and don't do these things, people are going to be pretty uncomfortable anyway. The best thing to look at a lot of these things is probably just to look at it from the point of view of it's a cultural thing. You know, you don't have to be Buddhist or Shinto, and in fact a lot of Japanese people aren't really Buddhist or Shinto. They just do the ceremonies. And we did one of the interviews, series of interviews on the interview playlist. There's a video about this topic, and most Japanese people, if you ask them, will tell you that they're not religious, but they all do these ceremonies, and it's just out of a sign of respect. It's just showing respect for the family and showing respect for the person who's passed away. That's all it is, you know. And there's no big, really. They're connected to the Buddhist type philosophies, but really it's more cultural than anything else. So if you just look at it from that point of view, you're just doing a cultural thing. That's all you're doing. Cultural, you're showing respect in the traditional cultural way. That's all you're really doing. Just do that, and then usually you'll sit down. Usually from there you'll go up to the open coffin and just bow to the person that's in the coffin. And again, if you're not used to this, for some people who've come from cultures where you don't have open coffins, it can be a bit of a spin out the first time you experience it, of course, because you're going up there and there's a coffin with a dead person in it. And at first it can be a bit of a spin out, but in actual fact there is something about it. There's something about it, we'll get into a little bit later, but there does seem to be a therapeutic type thing to the way these things are done. Quite often at the beginning it can seem like a lot of faffing, but in actual fact when you experience it with someone in your family or someone a bit closer to you, there does seem to be some therapeutic or some sense to it, you know. So you walk up and you sort of bow to the person that's in the coffin, and you usually bow to the family again. And again, just copy whoever's ahead of you or whoever's with you. If you're with someone else, let them go first and just copy what they do, or stand beside them. You know, we've talked about this before in Japan. You really got to just try and copy what other people do, and you get really good at standing beside people and doing what they do as they do it is the best thing to do. And then usually you'll sit down for a while in these places, and everybody just sort of sits there quietly, you know, and for as long as you're supposed to sit there. It depends, and again, it depends. If you're family, you could sit there all day, you know, you could sit there all day, sit there for hours, and then they have these funeral parlours they call them halls here, horde. These funeral halls have like a restaurant, no, not a restaurant, like a dining room. And usually what you'll do is they'll say to you, okay, let's go, and they'll take you off to the dining room, and you'll actually sit in there, and they make lunch for you, they make dinner for you, they bring you tea, they bring you, you know, snacks in the afternoon. And so what you'll do is you'll sit for a couple of hours in the room with the altar and the coffin, and then you go off to the restaurant, to the dining room, and sit there for a while and eat something and drink something, and then go back and sit there again for another couple of hours, and then, you know, now it's dinner time, you go in there and have dinner, and then you go back again. So if you're family, if you're close, this is what you'll end up doing. If you're a little bit more distant, you won't be expected to. Quite often, if you're distant, if it's your friend's grandmother or something like that, probably you'll go through that first part that I was talking about with the money and give them the money and fill out the paper, and then go in and do the incense thing, and then go and sit in there for a while, and you might be able to sit there for 30 minutes with your friend, and then they'll probably say to you, look, you don't have to hang around, you can leave, and then you can quietly leave. So you might have been there in total for an hour maybe. But the closer you are to the person, the more involved you'll be. And then that'll be the first day. Usually it's just sort of a chance. This first day or second day, sometimes 3 days, it depends on how many people the person's connected to. If the person's got lots of connections, you know, we had an uncle who was 65 and lots of business connections and lots of family connections, and so his sort of lying there thing went for 3 days, because there was people coming from all over the country. And that's the other thing, people have to come, people have to take time off work and come from all over the country to come say goodbye. So he was there for 3 days, and we were there for 3 days, and so people are coming from everywhere to say goodbye. And then they had the actual funeral itself, and during this process too, the Buddhist priests will come and do their thing. They'll come and do chanting and things as well, and they'll sit up the front, and when they're doing all that, there'll be a bit of involvement from the other people that are there too. And again, if you're there, just copy. And then the funeral itself, they'll come and do their chanting and thing, and then people get up and come and say, it's saying your last goodbye to the person. And again, there's a few variations to this, but quite often what they'll do is they'll bring the coffin out to the center of the room, and then they'll bring trays of those paper cranes, the little paper birds. They'll bring those, and everybody will put a paper crane into the coffin with the person, and then they'll bring trays of fresh flowers, and everybody will put a fresh flower in there. And this might sound to some people like, whoa, I don't want to do that, but you might find, if you do this, you might find it is actually sort of therapeutic, and it is actually quite nice. Because if you've been to other funerals with closed coffins, and quite often the last time you saw the person, they're in hospital, and the next time you see them, they're in a closed coffin, and you can't actually see them in this closed coffin. Whereas when they've got them lying out in this beautifully decorated, coffin with a pillow, and they're done with their makeup and or whatever they do to make them look natural, and they look very relaxed. They usually look very relaxed and sort of at peace, and then everybody's putting these flowers and cranes in it and that sort of thing, and it actually is quite nice. It really is quite nice. It can be. I mean, it depends on your feelings about all this, but it can actually be quite a sort of a positive thing. And then what they'll usually do is they'll bring over the coffin lid, and everybody will sort of put one hand under the coffin lid and lower it down onto the coffin. And that's a pretty emotional time, because of course the people that are closest, the sisters and the daughters and sons and the people that are closest to the person, this is often where people will be actually talking to the person and saying goodbye to them, goodbye, and that can be pretty hard. People are crying, and that can be pretty emotional moment. The lid goes on, and then they usually wheel the coffin out to the hearse outside, and everybody sort of walks with the coffin, and then the male members of the family will pick up the coffin and put it in the back of the hearse. And then usually what happens after that is the hearse goes off to the crematorium, and usually what happens is people either follow in a line of cars, or often those places have a minibus, and everybody gets on the minibus and it follows the hearse to the crematorium. And then they go to the crematorium, and usually go into a room, and the coffin will come in, and then curtains will open, and the coffin goes off into where the curtains, behind the curtains, into where the crematorium itself is. And then what happens is you have to wait. And I'm sorry guys, for some people this is going to sound a bit much, but we've got to tell you, because if you go to one of these things, you're going to want to know what's happening. So you go in there, and the coffin goes behind the curtains, and then they usually take you back again to sort of a dining room type thing, where people sit around and drink green tea and eat something and just sit around. And what's actually happening is that the coffin's gone into the actual oven thing itself, into the fire. And so you've got to wait a couple of hours while the body's actually in there in the fire. And then they have to do some things to it after that. And then what happens is they'll take you to another room, and this is where it starts to get a bit hairy, guys. Some of you might not like this, but it's what they do. So then they come out with a box, and it contains the ashes and the burnt bones of the person, right? And they'll give the family members, sometimes the close friends as well, but they give the family members and close friends special chopsticks from a tray. They'll hold out a tray, and they offer you these chopsticks, and you take the chopsticks, and they give you a special little box, little container, And in the box is ashes, but lots of little bones of different sizes and things, and it's the bone, obviously it's the bones of the person who's passed away, right? And so what you do is you use these little chopsticks to pick up the bones and put little bones in the little container, right, to take home. And see what the way it works, and we've showed you the Butsudan and the Kamidana in people's homes before. If you haven't seen them, we've got a video about them. Traditionally, Japanese people have Butsudan and Kamidana in their house. Most people do. And then in the Kamidana and in the Butsudan, they have these little drawers and little cupboards and things, and they put these little containers of bones in there. So we had an old guy once say to us, you know, there's my uncle's in here and my mother's in here and my father's over here, and I'm going in here. He's showing us the Butsudan in his house and telling us who was in what drawer and which drawer he's going into. And they're a beautiful, big, elaborate thing. So then everybody takes, not everybody, it's usually close family members and close friends take home this bone of this person, and put it in their Kamidana or Butsudan. Again, you don't have to. You know, if it is a family member of yours, one of your in-laws or something, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. But if you're married to a Japanese person, they probably will do it. And then you go home, and then they have ceremonies then, like memorial ceremonies, and they'll usually have one a week and again, it varies on the people. Some people do this to different extremes, but they'll have one ceremony a week, maybe on a Sunday, at their house, and the Buddhist priest will come once a week on a Sunday maybe, and sit there, and everybody sits, the family members all sit around on the floor in the house, you know, in front of that Kamidana or in front of that Butsudan in the family home, and he'll sit there and go no, and do his ceremony thing, and everybody just sort of sits around for an hour or so. And they'll do that every week, once a week, for sometimes months, and there's really a year. There's a year of ceremony, so it might start off once a week for the first couple of months, and then it might be once a month after that, and that'll go on all year. There's a few other things as well. There's things like you can't have any big celebrations during that year. So we just had someone pass away recently, and that triggered this video, and it means that we can't. We usually send out our New Year cards, and we'd actually bought a big pile of New Year cards to send out to everybody for New Year. And you don't send them out. You actually send out another plain card that says, sorry, we've had someone pass away in the family, so we're not doing the New Year card thing this year. And there's certain things like that. You don't usually go to any sort of celebration or anything like that during that year. And different people go to different lengths with this too, of course. You know, there's some people that take all this very seriously, there's some that don't. So just finally, the final piece of advice would be, if you're getting involved in any of these things, try just to go with it and just treat it as a cultural thing. Try to follow what everybody else is doing. You know, as always with these how-to videos, you don't want to be the one person who's doing something different when everybody's doing these things, you know, because it's going to be seen as just a selfish thing to do, particularly with something like this, with the funeral thing. Everybody's already emotional. They don't need you rocking the boat. So the advice would be to go with whatever's happening. Copy with that what everybody else is doing, and just pay attention, be alert and listen. You know, look, listen and learn is what we usually say, don't we? In our How to Do Stuff in Japan book, look, listen and learn. It's the best way. You know, listen to what people are telling you, look at what people are doing, and just copy what everybody else is doing and just go with it. And it's actually interesting. In the telling, all this might seem a bit woo to some people. Geez, don't want to do that, you know. But it's sort of interesting that there is a certain, in that period of time before the funeral itself, there is a certain time for people to adjust to what's happening. And then the funeral itself, there is actually a certain amount of peace that's brought about during that process of saying goodbye. And then this afterwards, this going on, you know, remembering the person once a week, you know, or what, you know, once a month or whatever for a year. There's sort of a therapeutic value in that too. So as with a lot of Japanese things, sometimes when you first hear about them, it's like, oh, I don't like the sound of that. But when you find yourself actually participating in it, quite often it does end up making more sense. as you get into it, it's like, oh well, I can sort of see why they do this, you know. So it's as in Rome, but as always with these how-to videos, some people just refuse to go with it, and that's fine too. I mean, we only make these videos for the people who want to try and do what everybody else is doing, you know. And they're just heads up, letting you know some observations of what we've seen, and then you can do with this information as you choose, of course. Anyway, there it was. More videos coming soon.